Hello, and welcome to On the Marie Curie Couch, the podcast that aims to break down taboos and start open, honest conversations about death and dying. I'm Jason Davidson. I'm a social worker by profession, and I've worked in palliative care, hospice care, and bereavement support services for more than a decade. Each episode, we'll be speaking to a well-known guest to find out about how they feel about their own mortality and how their personal experience of bereavement has shaped the way they live their life. Today, I'm on the Marie Curie Couch with AJ Pritchard. AJ is a dancer, choreographer, and presenter who first appeared on our screens in 2013 when he reached the semi-finals of Britain's Got Talent at the age of 18. Since then, AJ's featured on Strictly Come Dancing as a professional dancer, paired with celebs including singer and presenter Mollie King. Never want to shy away from a challenge, AJ's taken part in I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, The Challenge, and SAS Who Dares Wins. Alongside his brother Curtis, AJ also performs and hosts live events, and the pair are especially keen to embrace opportunities that get them in a fancy car as part of their Bros Talk Supercars venture. AJ was born in Stoke-on-Trent and now lives in London. AJ Pritchard, welcome to the Marie Curie Couch.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me. And it's I'm excited for this in a more relaxed, calm, neutral, and just a very, very nice conversation it is.
Good. Well, we've just talked about the aim of the podcast, and we're going to be having some conversations about death and dying and some of your experiences. So can I start by asking if you can tell me about a significant bereavement you've experienced in your life?
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes down to death and kind of bereavement, for me, it's always going to be my grandma is my first point of call. She's a person that passed away at a time when it was COVID. So death's never a normal thing, straightforward. It should be normal because it happens all the time, but it's never normal because it's something you put in your head like, oh, that happens to somebody else. That doesn't happen to me. It's really weird, kind of the way I've always boxed it up into a certain mentality. Maybe that's a safety mechanism for me. And I was doing, well, the irony was I was on a TV show. I decided to get me out of here in Wales that first year when COVID happened and we were all in isolation. And my grandma had dementia for quite a few years, but she was still, we called it happy dementia in the aspect that was she was always bubbly. She always loved, oh, I hear this music, I want to dance. I still recognize your faces, sometimes a little bit in and out, but I still know who you are. And it wasn't that kind of aggressive side, which unfortunately some people do go down that route a little bit more. So we'd always been saying goodbye to her for quite a few years. So every single time I went to visit Nanna and Grandad in Stoke-on-Trent, and it would always be like, oh, this could be the last hug, or this is the last selfie photo or video we take together, or even one of the ones when I was on Strictly and I was on the front cover of the Southern newspaper. We have to make fun of it. It was kind of like, she was like, but this person looks like you. Oh my God, they have the same name as you. Oh, they even live where you live. Like, I'm like, no, that is me. But we're filming it. We're having fun with it because sometimes, like, if you don't laugh, you cry, and the emotions are all up and down. But I think the one thing that's really important is always cherishing every moment. And sometimes you really feel like this is a bad moment, but no, they're the moments that kind of like that moment that I've just said right there. It's so vivid in my brain. It's so prevalent that I will always remember and cherish that in a positive way. It's not a negative way. So I feel like my experience in this scenario with my grandma, the hardest thing was coming out of the TV show, which I sometimes don't talk about a lot because I don't think I've ever talked about this actually. It's kind of weird. It's like I got told by a team of production, somebody I knew but didn't really know on a family level, that my grandma passed away when I was in the show. And in one side, I was prepared for it because I knew that when I went into the TV show, that she'd had a fall. She'd unfortunately broke her hip, and it was a time of COVID, and there was a lot of things happening. And I had already been saying goodbye for 5+ years, but still, you never prepare yourself for them words. And kind of like my mum and dad lived half an hour from where the show was being filmed. They came to the hotel room, and we obviously sat there and in the most healthy way, kind of cried, laughed, happy, sad, all the emotions that you have in 24 hours. And I didn't even sleep that night. I hadn't slept for like 48 hours after I got the news. So on one side, because I'd just come out by myself and hadn't eaten any food, suddenly eating a box of celebrations and giving myself a sugar rush for 48 hours. But on the other side, you play back all them memories of good, bad, and different. And I think the one thing that I appreciate in my moment is that I had the opportunity to say goodbye, and I'd already dealt with it. Still coming to a funeral and moving forward and being like, no, I'm going to stand up and talk. It's probably going to sound awful. I'm probably going to mess my words up. I'm going to be crying all over the shop, which I was. But I'd rehearsed that speech so many times too, because that was my bullet point on it. And I think one thing that we talk about personally, well, maybe it's just me. I'm not always very good at being in the moment. I'm always like, I jump to the next thing. This is kind of more career driven and like competitive dancing. Maybe it's like, there's always a room for improvement. There's always something else going on. Whereas actually when it came down to the actual funeral, and the irony with COVID was like, you were actually being rushed, but actually in that moment of time, it was kind of like, no, I'm going to cherish this moment and enjoy doing the speech and enjoy the celebration, because for us as a family, it was a real celebration of the person that our grandma was. She was an amazing person. So that's kind of my experience with death on that side with my grandma. And it's kind of, I look at it in such a kind of contrast. It's such a negative, but at the same time, it's such a positive in our family, in our memory, because it was kind of, she lived a great life. Like, you get into your 90s, you've done pretty well. You've definitely reached the full journey, that's for sure. You can't say that. And that's one thing that I kind of love. And again, it comes down to one thing that I think Marie Curie did so well is, even if you feel like you don't have a support network, with Marie Curie, there's always that kind of safe space. And even if it's hearing other people talk about it, listen to this podcast maybe, or seeing kind of small quotes on social media, and seeing that they're doing all the fantastic things like the tea mornings and stuff, like, it makes you feel like you're part of something, even at a time when you feel like you could be so alone. And in a day and age where social media supposedly brings everybody together, it can make you feel so alienated and actually like you can't ask for help. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation, like you have everything, the whole world at your fingertips, but actually sometimes you just don't know who to call, or you don't know who to talk to. And especially if I'm lucky, I've got my family and we are very close, but I can't imagine if I didn't have my family, how I would have dealt with them scenarios.
Yeah, and taking that first step, to kind of reach out. And as you say, it's like, well, who do you reach out to? Sometimes there's too much information. It's like, well, who's going to be able to give me what I need? Do you know, I was really struck there, AJ, when you were talking about coming out of the jungle, Cassie, and being told that your grandma had died, and that time of, you were literally eating celebrations, so that time of celebration of coming out of that house after succeeding and doing something and being on a high, and then getting that news, actually, I was thinking to myself, how difficult, what a really difficult situation to be in. But actually, it's always difficult. It's always difficult to get the news that a loved one's died. And you were at work, essentially, because that's what you do. And lots of people can come out of work and hear that news. But how was that?
I think my personality, I'm quite OCD. I like to be in control of things. I like to have like the things around me all very neat. I know where they are. Like, I feel comfortable. I feel in control. So when you come out of them scenarios, you don't know what you're going to be hit with. The information, I've done so many TV shows where you don't know what information can be given to you. You've been off the face of the planet for, in that case, I think it was 20 days. So you know things have happened. Like, it's a time of COVID, even more things have happened. Like, you don't know what can happen. And to be hit with a piece of information like that, the first piece of information was trying to control your emotions at the same time. And is actually the one thing that I've always spoken about in the past is like, be kind to yourself. Like, if you do feel happy, be happy. If you feel sad, be sad. Like, your body tells you like what you need to be. And in that time, like, it was a really weird one. I didn't know what to be. I didn't know if to be happy. Didn't know if to be sad. I was tired. I was exhausted. I hadn't eaten. I'm eating food now. I'm like, my whole body mentally is up in the air, and physically all over the shop. And I think it's just that kind of like empty feeling. You cry and you're empty and you're sad, but at the same time you're happy because it's all great memories. I think it's a really weird mixed bag. I think if it was a moment that was really sad and it's a shock and a surprise, it would have been very different. For me, I'm always looking for the positive. There's always light at the end of the tunnel. Everything happens for a reason. I just don't know what that reason is sometimes, and that's probably easier said than done. But in this moment, it's like there were so many great memories. I'd said goodbye to her. I got my phone back. I could look at photos the last time we were together. We took them videos for all these purposes, knowing that actually this is probably going to likely happen sooner rather than later. So in this instance, I'd prepared for that, and it was kind of really hard, but at the same time really positive. And knowing my parents were on their way, and it was a very hard time, that's for sure.
I think there's something in that preparation for however much we can prepare for it, and as you were saying, and lots of people say, I know in my own experience, you can never fully prepare for it. But one of the things we talk about in our work is about having conversations. One of the points of this podcast is about having conversations about death and dying.
Yeah.
So trying to open up that conversation a bit. Because what we know is if people do have those conversations and do talk about it, either talk about their experiences of loss, or if they're caring for somebody who's living with a terminal illness or somebody who's dying, then having those conversations can be helpful, even though they're difficult and hard. And I'm just wondering, it sounds like, I was going to ask whether you and your family have had open conversations about death and dying, certainly about I'm saying grandma. Was it Nanna? Do you call her Nanna? Grandma?
I always call her Nanna. I don't know why. It's kind of just always been there, but she's a grandma.
No, Nanna makes total sense to me because both my mum was Nanna. So, I think did you and your parents and the rest, your kind of family, were you having some of those conversations about death and dying in regards to your Nanna when she wasn't well?
Yes and no. I think the best way to explain this on a rather than going into long story. When we were both young, myself and Curtis, Curtis is 15 months younger than me, and in his class he had a friend, and she unfortunately had leukemia. And we were very young. We were 8 or 9. I may have gotten years wrong now. Mum will be like, you said the wrong years. But we were that sort of age. We were young. Well, we still understood death, and we still understood like somebody's there, somebody's not there. And myself and Curtis actually were the only 2 kids from our school that went to the funeral. And we learned very early on that we kind of dealt with that situation. It was a situation we all talked about as a family, that like she was here and then she wasn't here. And we kind of had to grow up very quickly because we were given the information. Our parents made the decision to talk to us and say that, unfortunately, she's died. She had leukemia. It's a disease, and the funeral was colourful. It was beautiful. She had a small casket. It was uplifting. It was amazing. But we had the time to cry and mourn. And the other kids at our school didn't go to the funeral within the same class. And we were only a class of each class about 20 kids, 30 kids. So it was a small community. Everybody knows everybody. And the other kids had so many nightmares about not understanding why she was there one day at school and why she wasn't there the next day. But myself and Curtis, because we talked about it, because we maybe understood it, we were treated as adults. We didn't have them nightmares. We processed it in a different way. And I think from that very early stage, we kind of, in one aspect, it did make you grow up. It made you value life a lot more when you were younger, and maybe going out there and being like that lust for life, because you know how precious life itself is, and you've been taught that from something that happened very early on. And that experience of talking about it very young, I think, was a positive thing within our lives, because we weren't treated as children in that aspect, and we were protected in the way that our parents chose how to speak to us, but we were given the information to understand what was happening. Because at the end of the day, like we said at the beginning, death it's inevitable. It's there, it's around us, and it happens to people at different stages of their lifetime. And I think giving more information and talking about it, treating people as though they should have that information to hand, is a better way to deal with it than bottling it up and just thinking it's going to be okay, or we'll talk about it tomorrow. The tomorrow scenario never usually happens. And I think that's one thing with children as well. Like, you'll have kids and grandparents that kind of, the irony is you have your kids that are being born and growing up, and the grandparents are suddenly there and taking care of the kids, and then they're gone. The connection between the kids and the grandparents is probably one of the strongest ones, more so than even the parents sometimes, because the parents usually have to go to work. The grandparents can actually look after the kids, and it's something we never really think about in that sort of aspect, but your connection is very strong there, and you create that connection whilst you're young and you don't even know you are. Well, you don't remember when you're 5, 6, 7. You don't. Like, anyone that says they do, nah, I'm not having it. But your body does, your heart does, your soul does, 100%. So when you do lose them people, there's a real loss. Even if you think you may not have been connected the past couple of years, you probably have deep down. That's for sure.
That was so perfectly put, AJ. And I think what I heard there, and is our experience through our work, is, you know, what your parents did was they protected you by telling you the truth, by being open with you and telling you the truth. And they didn't hide anything, because actually hiding it is not so good. So you describing that truth telling, you and your brother, as you described, feeling like you were being treated like adults, and actually you were just being told the truth about what happened. And you were probably given the facts in a way that you could understand as a young child. But actually what that's helped you to do, and what it does help to do, is to develop a basic understanding about life and death, and what death is, and how we can feel afterwards. And that's what you've just beautifully described in your story, AJ. And actually, you know, you've also touched on what can happen when it's hidden, and when it's not open, and when it's not discussed, like your friends having nightmares and just not understanding what's gone on. Why was somebody there and then now they're not there?
Yeah, because I feel like people don't talk about it. Like, even slightly coming away from death is something that we kind of fear sometimes because it's not understood. But if something's in the dark, don't know what's there, you're afraid of it, and just shedding a little light on it and talking about it. And that's the one thing that makes it not so frightening. It's natural. It's not something we should be hiding from. And I think just talking about it is the most important thing. And there's 3 big points in my life. When we were a child, we had that loss, and the other big point was grandma, and 2 very different scenarios of loss. And then one other person that I kind of lost when I was 18, 19, a lady that actually helped us when we were dancing and financially. And it was another loss from literally messaging the woman one day and waiting for the response to come back, and then getting a response from her secretary kind of saying that unfortunately she's passed away. And you're kind of like, what? And that loss in itself was one of the reasons why I actually did Strictly Come Dancing, because the lady that passed away kind of was always like, take every single opportunity, make sure you really enjoy life. And within that instance, somebody who could have done whatever, in whatever scenario, like, you can't get away from the scenario of, unfortunately, death and passing away. And that was one experience that I found really hard, because it was kind of like so out of the blue. What the hell are you expected to do? Like, she's still saved as my number 1 favorite on my call list. The lady is right at the top. And so every time I go to call any of my close friends and family and all that, her name is at the top of my call list. And the present she got me as a wallet is my wallet. And I will never get rid of that wallet, whatever. I use it every day. It's with me every single day. And it reminds me of her. And it's kind of like somebody who's had such a big impact on my life, and allowed me to become number 1 in the world dancing and take Strictly Come Dancing. And she was the kind of reason for doing it. Through something so sad, so negative, such a loss to the world, because she was such a bright light. But then actually, without her doing what she did and saying what she said, I maybe wouldn't be in my position now. Like, you never know the reason for it. You don't know the crossroads. You will come to a crossroads in your life. And some things are trauma. Some things are, obviously, we're talking about death right now. But these are massive crossroads, and they do impact your life more than you realize. I think the nice thing in here talking to yourself now, Jason, is kind of like you actually go back and you have that time to really process it and think about it. And like, my God, like you do things subconscious, like the wallet, and still saved in my phone as my favorite as number one. Like then people live with you through on. It's not that they're gone. And I think sometimes think that people kind of, because in Hollywood and in films and in video games, it sounds so brash and brutal here, but you shoot someone in video game and film, they die. Well, they're going to come back, they're fine. It's a video game, it's a film. But in reality, in our worlds, like somebody passed away, they're gone. But their spirit, their kind of what they've done in their life, how they've been remembered, what impact they've had on other people, that never dies. That always moves on. I think that's the one thing that I always appreciate in my life. Like whenever I do, if I say I'm going to do something, I say I'm going to do this podcast, I'm going to come on here, I'm going to be open, I'm going to talk, I'm going to thank you for your time, you thank me for my time. I'm never going to take anything kind of blasé. It's like, oh, willy-nilly. You know, if I say yes to something, I do it 100% because I feel like somebody else would want your time. Like they don't have that time. They unfortunately gone. Like they would give everything for just one extra second. So that's one thing that sometimes gets me down when I see people not taking the opportunities that I have, because I know some other people would do anything for them opportunities.
And she sounds like she was a really important person, AJ. And you know what? I'm struck by what you're saying, because actually you learned so much from her in her life, but also you've learned so much from her death. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, you have to. It's the more traumatic the experience, the more out of the blue these scenarios happen, the more you have to learn from these scenarios. Because at the end of the day, in my personality, if I don't learn from these experiences, I'm somebody who would just go a bit like probably off the rails, because I like to have everything in control. When something happens that you can't control, you're like, what do I do? How do I deal with it? So therefore, for me, it's always about kind of learning and being open to them emotions, being like what we said before, trying to be kind to yourself, even in a scenario where you maybe think, well, it doesn't matter how I feel. Somebody's just unfortunately had this experience.
And I love the fact you mentioned at the beginning when you talked about her that she'd financially supported, and the fact that you've got this wallet and it's like, yeah, she's still being financially supported because she's there in the wallet.
Yeah, I never thought about that, actually. That's really good, yeah.
Marie Curie offers free support over the phone to anyone with an illness they're likely to die from and those close to them. Our team of experts can offer practical and emotional help with medical, financial and general queries about end of life and bereavement. Call our free support line on 0800 090 2309 or visit mariecurie.org.uk/support.
You've touched on this already. I just wondered if we could talk a bit about your experience of grief and bereavement. And I think it would be good for people who are listening, I think, to hear about some of the experiences you had. So what grief was like for you, what some of the feelings were, and emotions, and just how it impacted. And then also what helped you and what you found helpful and find helpful with grief.
Yeah, I think I'm going to talk about it back to front, because I think it comes to the point where you hold everything in and certain traumas that happen. I'm somebody who was the person's like, no, I'm never going to talk to somebody. Like, I don't want to do that. I'm fine. But taking that first step and talking to somebody, being open. When I say talk to somebody, I mean that in a very broad scope. Everybody has somebody they can talk to, whether that be family members or friends, or if you do want to talk to someone anonymously. Like for me, I've done all of them. And I wouldn't say one is right for somebody else, but what I would say is do all of them and find out what works for you. I still kind of, this is a little, maybe not a technique, maybe it's just something I do. Like I spoke to a therapist due to a trauma a couple of years ago, and we spoke about some stuff, but I always put her in my diary just in 12 months time, just so that I know. I will probably not have that session in 12 months time. I'll probably say to her, I'll come and put it into another 12 months time. But the reason for having the session in the diary is knowing that if I feel like something's becoming too much, I know that that's in the diary. And then I think, because I think that certain person who I spoke to before, what would she say in that scenario? Or what technique would we do right now? Would we do a breathing technique? Or would we, well, whatever it may be, and that's different for each person. So I'm not going to say what I do personally. It's more like, for me, it's just clearing up my brain. that's the one thing that I found was the hardest to make the first decision, to pick the phone up and say to somebody, I need to talk to somebody. Like, I need to talk to somebody. That was the hardest thing, but the best thing ever. So it comes back down to it. Talking is the one thing that as soon as you said it out loud, and even if you're in a quiet room and nobody's around, saying stuff out loud is such a powerful thing to do. It's a really weird thing to start off with, but when you talk out loud, your brain processes it so differently. Like, maybe you think it, but then you can actually hear it. It's like you're increasing your senses. And then the thing that I personally always do, and it's one thing that I know that keeps my body in check, is fitness. I've always danced. I've always kind of used that, channeled that energy. And for me, my mental health and controlling that does come down directly to fitness. So if I go to the gym every single day, or if I go for a long walk and you see greens and browns, these colors that really make you feel calm, that keeps me in check. And I can feel if I haven't done that for 3 or 4 days, I will become agitated. And then I'll realize, well, I haven't done the same thing. I don't know if I've answered your question clearly there, but at the end of the day, what my thing is, it's talking. We say it all the time, and it is the most important thing for everything, mentally, physically, just talking to people.
Yeah, and I think that this, I'm just going to say they say, it's like, well, who are they? But people say that lots of the majority of the benefits of therapy happen outside of the room or outside of the session. And I think what I got there, just that, I love that thing about putting the date and the name and date and time for a year down the line in your diary, and actually getting to that point and being able to think, well, I've been given the bag of tricks that I need in these situations. Yeah. So rather than pick up the phone, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of open that bag of tricks and see which one of those strategies is going to help me in this situation and right now. And I think that's it takes a while to get to that point, but I think
that's not an overnight thing. No,
and I think it doesn't just have to be through therapy, but I think if you can have the opportunity to talk out loud, as you described, with somebody who you feel safe with and who you feel comfortable with, then what you're doing is, by talking out loud and having those conversations and getting that, you're ultimately supporting yourself as well. And so that afterwards, you'll be able to go back to that, and that will help you. So it helps to kind of build your resilience, if you like. What was grief like for you, if you can describe it? What were some of your experiences of it, or still are?
It's really hard one to process in your brain. Like, for me, the word that maybe would best describe it in my aspect is, you kind of say the word grief and you kind of put in your head the second word that would be after grief would be lost. And then that's like a process. But for me, it's that kind of empty feeling, because at that moment, your body's processing it. And like, in my personal opinion, it's like, as my body is trying to process that information that I've just been given, I feel empty. Like, I don't know if to be happy, sad, hungry, tired, whatever the hell the emotion is at the time or feeling, like just nothingness. And that's a feeling that I think people would maybe understand if they've had, not had grief before, but even if you do something wrong or you've broken your arm, or like for that second, you kind of like, what the bloody hell's happening? I don't know what to do. But think of that, obviously, times 10, times 100, depending on how that connection is with the person. But it's a very empty sort of feeling. Even finding out the Queen died, like at that moment, the whole country, like, it was a very silent moment. And I was the only one. I was in another country filming a TV show, and they stopped filming the show on that day. But when we got told, like, that brought back all the exact same emotions that I was filming a TV show when my grandma passed away. I'm filming a TV show again, now the Queen just died. Like, I was just sat frozen on a sofa when I got told, like, kind of slightly curled up into a ball. Not so much because of the Queen passing away, because I personally didn't know her, but it brought like all the same emotions of my grandma. And I just had to get out of the house, sit on the floor in the fresh air, and just sit there until like I could process what happened. Because me, the grief in the instance is a very empty feeling. because I don't know how to deal with it. I have to go through that in my head, that kind of, like, as you said, the bag of tricks, perfect analogy, like what's going to work in this moment right now.
And what you're describing, I mean, in my work over the years, I've spoken to hundreds of people who are grieving, and they're really normal grief responses. So that feeling of emptiness and numbness, some people describe it as.
Yes.
Some people talk about feeling robotic, and it's a really strange experience, especially when you go outside and you're walking down the street and life's going on around you, yet you're in this kind of empty, numb, robotic state.
It's like an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, really strange, but just for people listening, it's a very normal grief response, and it changes, it lifts.
I think the body it kind of goes into a safety mechanism, doesn't it? And your brain just kind of tries to tick over all of its things. Like, I need the heart to beat, I need the blood pump around the body, but that's all I can do right now because I'm still trying to process the information. Like, yeah, it's not a nice feeling, but you know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. You know that your body is taking care of you. That's how I put it. Like, some invisible person is giving you a weird hug, and you're kind of like, it's all going to be fine. I just need to, take a second or two.
And I just wanted to touch quickly on your point about your response and reaction to the death of the Queen, and again, a really normal response and reaction. So some people, will say, I just don't know. I mean, and I'm not talking just about the Queen, but, anybody who, any public figure who somebody might know, it might be a pop star. And, people said, I just don't know why I responded so like that. I don't know why I had such a reaction and such a response. But, you described one of the main reasons why that is because if we've experienced grief and loss within our own families or friendship groups or people close to us, people who we love, then it can bring up those feelings from the past as well. There's that like a cumulative effect, and that's what that can be. And one thing, can I ask your Nanna's name? I didn't ask her name.
It's Angela.
Angela, lovely. So just to change the conversation slightly, last few questions, which is linking back a bit to that kind of preparation, for when people are living with a terminal illness. And what we know through our work is if people prepare for death and dying, if they're diagnosed with a terminal illness or a family member has been, so for example, practical things like writing a will, and or having some conversations that they want to have that are really important to them with the people who they love, then that can be beneficial for them and for those who are left behind. Can I ask, do you ever think about your own death?
I had to remortgage the house, and the guy went, so do you have a will? I went, no. He was like, well, I recommend I get one. I was like, I'm 28. I've got no dependents. I've got no kids. Do I need a will? And it was like, I laughed out loud to him because I was like, why do I need a will? But then I got off the phone and I was like, death. And I did sit there for a couple of minutes thinking about what would happen to all, like, for me, it's a normal thing. I'd be like, well, what would happen to all my things? I was like, okay, well, mom and dad would get it, then Curls would get it, cool. But I was like, it's not something I like to think about because for me, I like to visualize. So the reason why I improved so quick when I danced, I had to, dyslexic on one side and some other traits, but I always have to visualize something. So I would always visualize success. I would always visualize what I want. And I would never allow any other things to kind of get into that line. I would always have blinkers on and only focus on the thing I want to. And if something knocked me off that line, I would find another positive line and then I would turn it into a positive. So in my mentality, I never think about the negative things, even though they could happen. And even in that scenario right then, I couldn't really process it. I just went back onto a positive thing. And it was kind of like a weird curveball of saying the word will and then saying, well, what happens if you die? And I still haven't dealt with that. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I've just kind of thought, like, my life's busy. I love what I'm doing. If anything, it just made me think I appreciate my life even more. Thinking that, oh, I could die. I am going to die at some point. Well, I'm going to appreciate what I have and who I have around me even more. So I don't know. How do you think about it?
I think because of the nature of my work and my job, then often when you're faced with death and grief, it can bring up thoughts about your own mortality. So I've certainly found through the course of my work that, yeah, I've thought about my death quite a lot. But actually, my next question was going to be about legacy and whether that was important to you and how you'd like to be remembered. But I don't want to push that question if it's not something you want to think about.
No, I think
But
legacy is a simple one. I just want to live the great life, and for me to all the people I've always met always had a positive impact on. It's quite simple, and the businesses and things that I do and opportunities that I have, being able to kind of reach a large audience, it's just to always have a positive impact on people and not have anything negative. I think like I appreciate what I have. I believe in karma. Good things come to good people, and I live by a quite simple code, really, to be honest. And I obviously want to provide for the family that I'll hopefully have in the future. And financially is on one point because unfortunately in this day and age, without money, it's quite hard to do a lot of things. And financial freedom is one thing that I do put a bit of pressure on myself so that in the future I can choose to do what I want rather than have to make decisions that I feel like maybe I would want to say no to because it doesn't represent me.
Thank you. My last question, how's it been for you today, AJ, being on the Marie Curie couch?
It's been really nice to take that moment and sit back and put some time and thought on them people, because then people mean so much to me. And again, like you kind of said with the legacy side, just I appreciate life even more so when we have these conversations. And I just hope this has helped somebody on the other end, because if anything, it's definitely helped me, that's for sure. Every time you talk about these things, it's like you're not just giving for other people, you're also helping yourself deep down. I think for me, it helps me as much as hopefully it helps somebody else.
Well, thank you, AJ, for joining me on the Marie Curie couch.
No, and thank you, Jason. Thank you for your time. You've made it a very safe space for me.
That's good to hear. And thank you for sharing some of Angela's story and for being so open and honest. And it's been a real joy to meet you.
Thank you.
So that's all for this episode of On the Marie Curie Couch. We hope it's got you thinking about matters of life and death, and perhaps starting those conversations with your own friends and family. Marie Curie's here to help, from planning ahead to coping with bereavement. You can talk through any concerns you have around the end of life with our support line team, which also includes specially trained nurses. Call us on 0800 090 2309 or search Marie Curie online. This podcast is produced and edited by Marie Curie with support from Ultimate Content. The music featured is Time Lapse by Pan Oceanic. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do like and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and until next time, goodbye.